The day they bulldozed my great-grandfather's bridge was the day I decided to turn their $4 million lakefront resort into a muddy parking lot. It's 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'm sipping coffee on my dock when I hear the rumble of diesel engines. Through the morning mist, I see a bulldozer rolling toward the stone bridge my great-grandfather built with his own hands in 1923. The same bridge that connected our community for 100 years. The bridge that some power-hungry HOA president decided was an eyesore. But here's what Linda Prescott and her fancy HOA board didn't know about water rights in Texas. My great-grandfather didn't just build that bridge, he controlled the dam. And I'd just inherited something more powerful than any HOA bylaw, the legal right to drain their entire lake. Drop a comment. What would you do if someone destroyed your family's legacy? And where are you watching from? I want to see how many of you have dealt with these HOA tyrants. My name's Jake Morrison. I'm a civil engineer, and 3 months ago I inherited the most beautiful piece of lakefront property you've ever seen. My great-grandfather, Samuel Morrison, built our family cabin back in 1920, right after he got back from the Great War. But the real masterpiece was the bridge. Sam didn't just slap together some planks and call it good. This man hand-cut limestone blocks from the local quarry and built a proper stone arch bridge that connected our side of the lake to the main road. For 100 years, that bridge served everyone. Fishermen heading to their favorite spots, kids walking to swimming holes, neighbors helping neighbors. It was the heart of our little community. When I inherited the place, my wife Sarah and I had dreams. We'd been saving every penny, planning to retire there in a few years. I'd fix up the cabin, maybe do some consulting work from home, spend my mornings fishing off that old wooden dock. The creak of those weathered planks under my boots was like a lullaby. Then Linda Prescott happened. Linda's the kind of woman who wears pearls to the grocery store and drives a spotless white BMW that's never seen a dirt road. She moved into the Whispering Pines luxury community 2 years ago. That's the fancy development that sprouted up on the other side of the lake like mushrooms after rain. Within 6 months, she'd maneuvered herself into the HOA presidency. I should have seen trouble coming when I got that first certified letter. The envelope had that official weight to it, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. Inside was Linda's sweetest pie letterhead, declaring that my bridge violated community architectural standards and had to go. I laughed, actually laughed out loud. My bridge was built when her development was still cow pasture. But Linda had done her homework, or thought she had. The letter cited HOA Covenant number 47B, architectural review requirements, and threatened me with $500 a day in fines if I didn't remove the bridge within 30 days. That's when I started digging through boxes in my grandfather's attic. Musty old papers that smelled like dust and time, but legal documents nonetheless. I found the original survey maps, the deed records, and most importantly, the grandfathering clause that specifically protected existing structures. My bridge was literally older than the HOA by 8 decades. Armed with my paperwork, I showed up to the next HOA meeting in the community center. You know that particular smell of institutional buildings? Floor wax and stale coffee and the faint scent of disappointment? That was my introduction to HOA politics. I spread my documents across the folding table like I was playing a winning poker hand. "Gentlemen, ladies," I said, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Linda barely glanced at my papers. Her response still makes my blood boil. "Times change, Mr. Morrison. Progress requires sacrifice." She said it with this condescending smile, like she was explaining basic math to a child. The board vote was a foregone conclusion, 5-2 in favor of enforcement. Linda's allies, all recent arrivals with more money than sense, outnumbered the old-timers who actually remembered what community meant. Walking back to my truck after that meeting, the gravel crunching under my feet, I realized something important. This wasn't about architectural standards or community vision. This was about power. Linda saw my humble bridge, my working-class cabin, my beat-up pickup truck, and decided I didn't fit her vision of an upscale neighborhood. She wanted me gone. Sarah tried to stay optimistic. "We'll fight this together," she said over dinner, squeezing my hand across our little kitchen table. "You've got the law on your side." I nodded and smiled, but privately, I was wondering if being right would be enough. What I didn't know yet was that Linda had picked a fight with the wrong engineer. See, I didn't just know about building codes and property law. I knew about water. Linda didn't waste time moving from threats to action. 3 days after that board meeting, I'm heading out to work when I spot two guys in matching polo shirts standing near my property line. Security guards. At 7 in the morning, on a Wednesday. "Morning, gentlemen," I called out, coffee mug in hand. "Y'all lost?" The older one, built like a retired linebacker, pulled out a clipboard. "HOA Compliance Patrol, sir. We're documenting violations." I nearly choked on my coffee. Violations? Like what? Grass exceeds HOA standard of 3 inches in multiple areas. Dock requires repainting per aesthetic guidelines. Storage shed needs pressure washing. He was reading this stuff like a grocery list. Over the next 2 weeks, these clowns wrote me up for everything short of breathing too loud. My mailbox was apparently the wrong shade of black. My welcome mat was non-compliant sizing. They even cited me for having a fishing net visible from the road. By week 3, I was staring at $1,200 in fines. That's when I did what any good engineer does when faced with a problem. I investigated the system. Turns out, Linda's husband Rick owns Prescott Security Solutions. Cute, right? The HOA was paying her husband's company $3,000 a month to harass homeowners into compliance. I spent an evening on the state contractor licensing website and discovered something interesting. Rick's security license had expired 6 months ago. He'd been operating illegally this entire time. Here's a knowledge nugget for you. In Texas, HOA security must be licensed, just like any private security firm, and most aren't. Always check their credentials before letting them cite you for violations. But I wasn't done digging. I called in a favor from a buddy who does commercial inspections. We took a little walk around Linda's pristine property one Saturday morning. Her deck extension? No permits. Her pool house? Built 6 inches over the setback line. That fancy Japanese garden she was so proud of? According to the original survey I'd found, it was 3 feet onto my property. Linda had been trespassing for 3 years. The next Monday, I filed complaints with the state licensing board about Rick's security company and requested a full survey of the property line. I didn't make a big show of it, just handled it like any other engineering problem. Document everything, follow proper procedures, let the facts speak for themselves. Linda's response was predictable. Within a week, I started hearing whispers at the hardware store. "Jake Morrison's been difficult to work with. He's lowering property values with that ugly bridge. Some people just don't understand progress." Sarah came home from the grocery store one Thursday looking frustrated. "The cashier barely made eye contact," she said, "and Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop acted like I had the plague." That's when the anonymous complaints started rolling in. Someone called the county claiming my bridge was structurally unsafe. Another tipster reported that I was dumping chemicals in the lake, which was hilarious since I'm an environmental engineer who tests water quality for a living. But here's where Linda made her first real mistake. While she was busy playing neighborhood politician, I was doing what I do best, reading technical documents. I'd submitted a public records request for anything related to water rights and dam operations around our lake. What I found in those musty county files made me sit up straight in my kitchen chair. There were maps I'd never seen before, showing water flow patterns from the 1920s, engineering reports from my great-grandfather's era, and most interesting of all, documentation of something called secondary water rights that had never been transferred to the HOA. I spent that weekend walking around the lake with a surveyor's eye, really looking at how the water moved. The resort that Linda kept bragging about, the one that was supposed to bring class to our community, had a serious vulnerability. Their entire operation depended on consistent water levels. Their boat docks, their lakefront dining, their million-dollar water features, all of it assumed the lake would stay exactly where it was. The smell of diesel fuel still hung in the air from their construction equipment, and I could taste the irony. Linda was so focused on my little stone bridge that she'd never bothered to understand the bigger picture. I drove home that evening with a new understanding of my situation. Linda thought she was playing chess, moving her HOA pieces around the board to force me out, but she didn't realize I wasn't just another homeowner she could bully. I was the guy who understood how the water worked. Linda's next move came with the subtlety of a freight train. I'm sitting in my home office one Tuesday morning when I hear trucks pulling up outside. Not just one truck, 3, county vehicles, and a man in a hard hat carrying the kind of clipboard that ruins your day. Jake Morrison? The inspector looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Anonymous tip about structural concerns with your bridge. I'm here to conduct a safety evaluation. Anonymous tip. Right. I could practically smell Linda's expensive perfume lingering in the morning air. The inspection took 4 hours. This poor guy crawled over every inch of my great-grandfather's stonework with calipers and moisture meters. When he finished, he had the decency to look embarrassed. Mr. Morrison, your bridge is solid as the day it was built, but, he consulted his clipboard, current code requires seismic reinforcement for structures this size. Estimated cost for compliance is $3,000. You've got 10 days to submit improvement plans or we'll have to condemn it. $3,000 for earthquake protection. In Texas, where the biggest seismic event in living memory was when they blasted rock for the new highway. But here's where Linda got clever. The inspector handed me a business card along with the citation. Prescott Construction can handle the work. Rick Prescott gave me a quote for $12,000, says he can have it done in a week. I stared at that business card like it was a snake. Rick Prescott, Linda's husband, volunteering to fix the problem his wife had created for $12,000. What a coincidence. That evening, I made some phone calls. Started with the State Contractor Licensing Board, where a very helpful woman named Maria pulled up Rick's file. Sir, Mr. Prescott's contractor license expired 24 months ago. He's not legally authorized to perform construction work for hire. Next call was to my buddy at the county building department. Jake, that seismic requirement, it only applies to new construction and major renovations. Existing structures are grandfathered unless they're actually unsafe. Here's your second knowledge nugget. Water rights in the American West often predate modern property law. They can trump HOA rules, zoning ordinances, and sometimes even eminent domain. Armed with this information, I decided to dig deeper into those water rights documents. What I found in the county archives made my hands shake. My great-grandfather hadn't just built a bridge and a cabin. He'd held secondary water rights to the entire lake system, granted back when this was still ranch country. Those rights included something called Flow Management Authority. In plain English, I could legally control how much water stayed in the lake. I spent the next 2 days studying engineering reports from the 1920s dam construction. Fascinating stuff, really. The original designers built bypass channels that could redirect water around the main dam. My great-grandfather's bridge wasn't just transportation. It was positioned to control a secondary spillway system. Meanwhile, Linda was busy playing her reputation game. She'd somehow convinced 3 of my neighbors that I was unstable and potentially dangerous. I came home one evening to find new security cameras pointed directly at my property from 2 different houses. Sarah noticed it first. Honey, Mrs. Rodriguez won't even wave anymore. And Tom at the marina acted like I was carrying the plague when I stopped for bait. The breaking point came when Linda filed for a restraining order, claimed I'd made threatening statements about the dam and posed a clear and present danger to community safety. The judge took one look at her evidence, which consisted entirely of my public records requests and my questions at HOA meetings, and tossed it out. But the damage was done. Half the neighborhood now thought I was some kind of unhinged domestic terrorist. That's when I made a discovery that changed everything. I was reviewing the resort's environmental impact study when I noticed something in the fine print. Their bank loan had very specific requirements about water levels. If the lake dropped below a certain depth, their entire $4 million loan would become immediately due. The resort's grand opening was 3 months away. Deposits had been collected for weddings, corporate retreats, fishing tournaments. Linda's family had invested $500,000 of their own money in the project. I sat in my kitchen that night, staring at those loan documents, and realized something profound. Linda thought she was fighting a battle about HOA rules and property aesthetics. But she'd picked a fight with someone who understood the one thing her entire development depended on. Water doesn't care about HOA bylaws. It flows according to physics and legal precedent. And I was beginning to understand that I held more power than any HOA president ever could. The metallic taste of stress had been my constant companion for weeks, but that night it was replaced by something else entirely, the taste of possibility. Linda's patience finally snapped the week before Thanksgiving. I'm checking my mailbox when I see her marching across the street in those ridiculous white heels, clutching another manila envelope like it contained nuclear launch codes. "Mr. Morrison," her voice could have cut glass, "I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting. Your bridge represents an immediate safety crisis that cannot wait for normal procedures." She thrust the envelope at me with enough force to give me a paper cut. Inside was a notice for a crisis intervention meeting scheduled for the next evening. The agenda was simple: vote to authorize immediate bridge removal, with or without my consent. The meeting was a circus. Linda had imported her golf partner from Dallas, some guy claiming to be a structural engineer who'd never actually seen my bridge but was happy to declare it a death trap. His presentation included phrases like catastrophic failure risk and imminent public danger, real professional stuff. The vote was swift and merciless, 7-1 in favor of immediate removal. The lone dissent came from Mrs. Chen, an 80-year-old woman who'd lived here since the 1960. Everyone else had either been bought, intimidated, or convinced that I was some kind of bridge-building madman. "A contractor will begin tomorrow morning," Linda announced with barely concealed glee. "Removal fees of $15,000 will be added to Mr. Morrison's account. If payment is not received within 30 days, a lien will be placed on the property." $15,000. To destroy something my great-grandfather built with his own hands. I drove home in a fog, the rough texture of my steering wheel the only thing keeping me grounded. Sarah took one look at my face and poured 2 glasses of wine without saying a word. That night, I did something I'd never done before in my engineering career. I filed an emergency injunction in county court. Not because I was confident it would work, but because I was out of other options. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. the next morning, exactly when Linda's contractor was supposed to start demolition. I walked into that courthouse at 8:30 carrying a banker's box full of documents, water rights records, contractor licensing violations, evidence of HOA fund misuse, and structural reports proving my bridge was safer than most county roads. Judge Martinez listened for exactly 12 minutes before making his decision. Emergency injunction granted. 30-day temporary restraining order issued. "Mr. Morrison, you have 1 month to resolve this matter through proper legal channels." I called Linda from the courthouse parking lot. "Demolition's canceled," I said. "You might want to tell your contractor." The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, "This is war, Mr. Morrison. I hope you understand that." Here's knowledge nugget number 3. Emergency injunctions can halt HOA actions if you can demonstrate immediate, irreversible harm, but you need documented evidence, not just angry feelings. That afternoon, I discovered something that made Linda's declaration of war feel almost quaint. I was reviewing HOA financial records, which are public documents, by the way, when I noticed some interesting discrepancies. Over the past year, Linda had authorized $30,000 in legal consultations and emergency contractor services. Every single payment went to companies owned by her husband or her brother-in-law. I spent the weekend playing forensic accountant, cross-referencing every payment with business licenses and corporate filings. Linda hadn't just been using HOA funds to harass me. She'd been treating the community treasury like her personal piggy bank. But the real revelation came when I found the lake's original engineering survey from 1923. My great-grandfather hadn't just built a bridge. He'd positioned it as a control structure for what the old documents called secondary flow management. The bridge wasn't just crossing the water. It was part of a larger water control system that included the main dam. I spent hours studying those faded blueprints, the musty smell of old paper filling my kitchen as I traced water flow patterns with my finger. The more I understood about the original design, the more I realized Linda had made a catastrophic error in judgment. She thought she was fighting some working-class guy with a stubborn streak, but my great-grandfather had been the chief engineer on this entire lake system. He'd built redundancy and control into every structure, including his bridge. That Sunday evening, I called my old professor from A&M, a guy who specialized in historical water rights law. After I explained the situation, he was quiet for a long moment. "Jake," he finally said, "if what you're telling me is accurate, you don't just own a bridge. You own water management authority for that entire lake system. That's not an HOA matter anymore. That's federal water rights law." I hung up the phone and walked out to my dock. The The taste of November air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of coming winter. For the first time in months, I smiled. Linda had declared war, but she had no idea what weapons I was about to bring to the fight. The lake drops exactly 18.5 inches over the next 6 hours. By sunset, the resort's million-dollar boat docks were sitting in mud, and their grand opening weekend was officially canceled. The bank called their loan that same evening. But here's the thing about water. It's patient and it's fair. Within 24 hours, I'd restored normal flow to the lake. The investors, suddenly very interested in negotiating with the guy who controlled their water supply, made me an offer I could actually respect. "Mr. Morrison," said James Chen, the lead investor, "we'd like to propose a partnership. You maintain your bridge as a historic landmark, we get guaranteed water levels, and everyone wins." 3 months later, the resort reopened under new management. Linda was long gone. Last I heard, she'd moved to Arizona after facing federal charges for attempted bribery and misuse of HOA funds. Her husband, Rick, lost his contractor's license permanently and had to sell their house to pay legal fees. The new HOA board, led by Mrs. Chen and Tom Rodriguez, established the Morrison Bridge Historic District. My great-grandfather's bridge became the centerpiece of a community heritage trail that actually brought more tourists than Linda's exclusive resort vision ever could have. Property values didn't collapse like Linda had predicted. They actually increased. Turns out, people like living in communities with authentic history and neighbors who look out for each other, rather than corporate developments run like private kingdoms. Sarah and I used our newfound local celebrity to establish the Samuel Morrison Water Rights Scholarship for engineering students at Texas A&M. Funded by speaking fees from the dozen water rights conferences where I've told this story, it's already helped 5 kids study environmental engineering. The first recipient was Maria Rodriguez, Tom's daughter, who wants to specialize in sustainable water management. She'll graduate next spring and has already accepted a position with the State Water Authority. The ceremony was held on the bridge, naturally, with the entire community celebrating together. Tom got promoted to resort manager and hired back all the employees Linda had laid off during her reign of terror. The resort now donates 5% of its profits to local schools and sponsors an annual Bridge Day festival that celebrates our community's history. Frank Wilson came out of retirement to train me on advanced dam operations, and I've become the official water management consultant for 3 other lake communities facing similar HOA disputes. Turns out there are a lot of Lindas out there and a lot of forgotten water rights waiting to be rediscovered. The legal precedent we set has been cited in 12 other federal water rights cases across Texas. Patricia tells me we've probably prevented dozens of communities from getting bulldozed by developers who thought money could override century-old law. My bridge is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Every morning I walk across those limestone blocks my great-grandfather laid with his own hands, and I can almost hear him chuckling about how his water management system saved the day. The resort thrives, the community is stronger than ever, and our little lake has become a model for how development and history can coexist when people choose cooperation over domination. Linda's story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked HOA power. Last month, the state legislature passed the Morrison Act, requiring all HOA boards to respect pre-existing water rights and historic structures. Small victories, but they add up. Sarah and I are expecting our first child next spring. They'll grow up running across that old stone bridge, learning to fish from the same dock where I learned from my grandfather. Some legacies are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. The best part? Our new neighbors actually like having us around. We've become the go-to family for community barbecues, and I've helped 3 different homeowners navigate their own HOA disputes without anyone having to drain any lakes. But if you're dealing with your own HOA nightmare, remember this: knowledge is power, history matters, and sometimes the best weapon against bureaucratic bullying is understanding the law better than the bullies do. Drop a comment with your own HOA horror story. I read every one, and I've got ideas for dealing with these petty tyrants. And if you want to hear about the corrupt city council that tried to steal an elderly farmer's land through eminent domain and how century-old mineral rights saved her farm, hit that subscribe button. That's a story for next time. The sound of children's laughter echoes off the old stone bridge now, mixed with the gentle lap of water that knows exactly where it belongs. Friday morning brought the kind of chaos that makes you question reality. I'm drinking coffee on my porch when 3 sheriff's deputies pull up, followed by Linda in her pristine BMW and 2 guys in expensive suits who screamed, "Federal lawyers." "Jake Morrison," the lead deputy looked apologetic. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of criminal threatening and conspiracy to commit environmental terrorism." Environmental terrorism. For exercising legal water rights my family had held for a century. Patricia had warned me this might happen. Within 2 hours, I was bonded out and sitting in her Austin office while she worked her magic with federal authorities. Turns out Linda's Blackstone lawyers had convinced a federal judge that my water rights posed an imminent threat to interstate commerce and environmental stability. The restraining order was comprehensive. I couldn't approach the dam, couldn't operate any water controls, couldn't even discuss water management in public. Linda had essentially used the federal court system to neutralize my only leverage. But Patricia smiled when she read the full order. "Jake, they just made a huge mistake. This restraining order acknowledges your water rights exist. They're just temporarily restricting them. That's federal recognition of your claim." Within 6 hours, Patricia had filed her own federal lawsuit asserting water rights violation under the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899. More importantly, she'd obtained a counter-injunction that superseded the local restraining order. "Federal water rights trump local criminal complaints every time," she explained. "Linda's lawyers gave us exactly the precedent we needed. Here's a crucial knowledge nugget. Federal water rights enforcement can override local law enforcement actions when historical claims predate state and local jurisdiction." But Linda wasn't done with her scorched earth campaign. That afternoon, I discovered she'd hired a private security firm to patrol the dam area 24 hours a day. Not just any security firm, ex-military contractors who looked like they'd stepped out of an action movie. Sarah came home from the grocery store with news that made my stomach drop. "Honey, there are news trucks at the end of our street, and Mrs. Patterson said Linda's been telling people you're planning to poison the water supply." Poison the water supply. Linda had officially jumped from harassment into full-blown character assassination. The media circus exploded over the weekend. Local TV stations ran stories about domestic eco-terrorism and water rights extremism. Linda appeared on 3 different news programs playing the role of concerned community leader, protecting innocent families from a deranged individual with dangerous expertise. But the media attention worked both ways. By Sunday, property rights organizations from across Texas were calling to offer support. Environmental lawyers were volunteering their services. Even some resort employees were quietly reaching out to say they supported my position. The community was splitting down the middle. Longtime residents who remembered my great-grandfather rallied around my family's history. Newer residents, terrified their property values would tank, sided with Linda's development vision. Monday brought the nuclear option Linda had been building toward. The HOA board called an emergency community protection meeting to authorize any and all measures necessary to prevent me from accessing the dam. They'd essentially voted to hire armed guards to stop me from exercising federally protected water rights. That's when Frank Wilson made a decision that changed everything. He called me at 6 in the morning with an offer that made my hands shake. "Jake, I've been operating this dam for 30 years, never seen such a mess over something so simple. I'm retiring effective immediately, and I'm recommending you as interim dam operator under your water rights authority." Interim dam operator. With federal water rights and official operational authority, Linda's private security couldn't legally stop me from doing routine maintenance, including testing the secondary flow channels. The final piece fell into place when Tom Rodriguez called with information that would destroy Linda's credibility forever. He'd been wearing a wire during his conversations with the sheriff's department, documenting Linda's attempted bribery. "Jake, she offered me $15,000 yesterday. Said if I could make it look like you sabotaged the controls yourself, she'd make sure I got a promotion and a raise. I've got it all recorded." $15,000 for false testimony. Linda had crossed from civil disputes into federal felony territory. That evening I sat with Sarah on our dock, listening to the gentle lap of water against the pilings. The smell of approaching rain hung heavy in the air, and I could taste the electricity of the coming storm. "Tomorrow's the day," I told her. "Linda's made her choice, and now I have to make mine." Sarah squeezed my hand. "Your great-grandfather would be proud. Sometimes standing up for what's right means making hard choices." Tuesday morning, Linda would learn that some battles aren't won by whoever has the most expensive lawyers or the loudest media campaign. Sometimes they're won by whoever best understands the law, the physics of water, and the weight of family legacy. Tuesday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of day that makes everything seem sharper, more defined. I arrived at the dam at 8 a.m. with Patricia, Frank, and a small army of media representatives who'd been following the story. Linda was already there with her private security team, 3 sheriff's deputies and enough lawyers to staff a small firm. She'd positioned herself between me and the dam controls like some kind of environmental Custer making her last stand. "You will not pass," she announced to the gathering crowd, her voice carrying that particular pitch of desperation disguised as authority. "I am protecting this community from a dangerous individual who threatens our way of life." Channel 8 News had set up cameras. The county sheriff himself had come to oversee what everyone knew would be the final confrontation. Even some resort investors had driven down from Dallas, probably calculating how much money they stood to lose. I walked up to the concrete housing that concealed the bypass controls, carrying the folder containing a century of legal documentation and Frank's official letter transferring dam operation authority to me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the crowd, my voice carrying across the morning air, "I'm here to perform routine maintenance on secondary water management systems that have been operated by my family since 1923. Linda stepped directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the acrid scent of panic sweat. "I have a federal restraining order preventing you from approaching this equipment." Patricia stepped forward smoothly, handing a document to the sheriff. "Your Honor, that restraining order was superseded by federal water rights enforcement yesterday evening. Mr. Morrison has full legal authority to operate these systems." The sheriff read the document carefully, nodded, and stepped aside. "Ma'am, he has federal jurisdiction here. You need to move back." That's when Linda truly lost it. "This is insane," she screamed at the cameras. "You're going to let this lunatic destroy a $4 million investment because of some piece of paper from 1923? People like him don't belong in our community." People like him. On live television, Linda had just revealed exactly what this fight had always been about. Not HOA rules, or architectural standards, or community safety. This was about class, about who deserved to belong in her vision of an exclusive lakefront paradise. I knelt down beside the concrete housing and began removing the access panel with tools Frank had provided. Each bolt came loose with the metallic ring of finality, and I could hear the crowd holding its collective breath. "Mr. Morrison," called a reporter from Channel 8, "can you explain exactly what you're doing?" "I'm opening secondary flow channels that were designed by my great-grandfather in 1923, I replied, not looking up from my work. "These channels allow controlled release of excess water during maintenance operations. Everything I'm doing is completely legal under federal water rights law and normal dam operation procedures." The access panel came free, revealing the massive brass wheel that controlled the bypass valves. Frank had oiled the mechanism the week before, and it turned with surprising ease for something nearly a century old. Linda made one final desperate attempt to stop me. "Sheriff, he's going to drain our lake. He's destroying private property. Arrest him." Sheriff Martinez looked at her with the patient expression of a man who dealt with too many HOA disputes. "Ma'am, this is federal jurisdiction and legal dam operations. I can't arrest a man for turning a valve he has legal authority to operate." I gave the wheel 3 full turns clockwise. Somewhere deep in the dam structure, century-old mechanisms responded exactly as Samuel Morrison had designed them. Water began flowing through the secondary channels with a deep, throaty rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. The crowd watched in fascination as the lake level began dropping at a visible rate. Within 20 minutes, you could see the water line receding from the resort's dock pilings. Linda stood, frozen, watching her $4 million investment literally draining away. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "You can't do this. You can't just destroy everything we've built." I stood up, brushing dirt off my hands, and faced the cameras for my final statement. "Mrs. Prescott, I offered you compromise. I offered you negotiation. I offered you respect for both your investment and my family's legacy. You chose war instead. This is what losing a water rights war looks like." The resort's boat docks were already becoming unusable. By evening, the entire shoreline would be exposed mud. Linda's grand opening, scheduled for the following weekend, would be a disaster. But the most beautiful sound of the morning wasn't the rushing water or the clicking cameras. It was Mrs. Chin's voice, carrying clearly across the crowd. "Welcome home, Jake. Your great-grandfather would be proud." Monday morning, I drove to the county archives with the kind of focused intensity I usually reserved for major engineering projects. The clerk, a patient woman named Dorothy who'd been there since the Carter administration, helped me pull every document related to the 1923 dam construction. What I found changed everything. Buried in a file marked Historical Water Management Lake Morrison System was the original construction contract, not just for the dam, but for the entire water control infrastructure. My great-grandfather Samuel Morrison wasn't just some farmer who built a bridge. He was the chief hydraulic engineer for the whole project. The critical document was a water rights agreement dated March 15, 1923. In legal language that took me 3 readings to fully understand, it granted Samuel Morrison and his heirs perpetual secondary water rights, including flow management authority for Lake Morrison and associated tributaries. Flow Management Authority. Those 3 words meant I didn't just have the right to use the water, I had the legal authority to control how much water stayed in the lake. But the real bombshell was what I found next. The resort's bank loan documents, which were public records since they'd received county tax incentives, included specific performance clauses. If the lake level dropped below 18 inches from full capacity for more than 72 hours, the entire $4 million construction loan would be called due immediately. 18 inches. I did the math in my head. The lake was currently 22 inches below the spillway. If I opened the secondary channels my great-grandfather had built, I could drop it another 18 inches in about 6 hours. The resort had collected over $200,000 in deposits for their grand opening weekend. Wedding parties, corporate retreats, fishing tournaments, all assuming they'd have a pristine lake for their events. Linda's family had personally invested $500,000 of their own money in the project. Her husband Rick had co-signed the loan, using their house as collateral. I sat in that archive room, surrounded by the smell of old paper and bureaucratic dust, and realized I was holding a nuclear weapon in a water rights war. The moral weight of it hit me immediately. This wasn't just about Linda anymore. The resort employed 43 people. I'd checked. Waitresses, groundskeepers, boat captains, cleaning staff. Most of them were local folks who needed those jobs. But Linda had made this personal. She'd tried to destroy something that represented 4 generations of my family's history. She'd used community funds to line her own pockets. She'd turned neighbors against each other and treated our little lake community like her personal kingdom. I spent that afternoon walking around the old dam structure, really studying it for the first time as an engineer rather than just a nostalgic grandson. The 1920s construction was brilliant in its simplicity. Samuel Morrison had built manual bypass valves into the original design, hidden under decades of moss and rust, but still functional. The irony was perfect. Linda had spent months fighting me over HOA architectural standards while sitting on top of a water system I could control with a few turns of a century-old valve wheel. That evening, I made a decision that would define everything that came next. I wouldn't use this nuclear option immediately. Linda deserved one final chance to step back from the brink, one opportunity to negotiate like reasonable adults instead of playground bullies. But if she refused, if she continued to push and escalate and try to destroy my family's legacy, well, Linda was about to learn that some wars aren't won by whoever has the most expensive lawyers or the fanciest development plans. Sometimes they're won by whoever best understands the physics of water and the weight of history. I walked back to my cabin that evening with a strange sense of calm. For the first time in months, I wasn't the underdog anymore. I wasn't the guy getting pushed around by petty authority and bureaucratic intimidation. I was the guy who could drain their lake. The next morning, I started assembling my team. First call went to Patricia Gomez, a water rights attorney in Austin who specialized in historical claims. Her reputation preceded her. She'd successfully defended ranchers against corporate water grabs and knew Texas water law better than most judges. "Jake," she said after I'd explained the situation, "if your documentation is solid, you're not just holding a strong hand. You're holding a royal flush in a game where everyone else thinks they're playing checkers. Patricia agreed to take the case on contingency, which told me everything I needed about her confidence level. She'd drive up the next weekend to review all the documents and assess our legal position. Next, I called Frank Wilson, the old-timer who'd been operating the dam for 30 years. Frank had actually worked alongside men who'd learned the system from my great-grandfather. If anyone understood the mechanical reality of the water controls, it was him. "Your granddaddy was a smart man," Frank told me over coffee at the diner. "Built redundancy into everything. These new folks running the resort, they don't even know those bypass channels exist, haven't been used since the drought of '86. Frank agreed to walk me through the entire system and explain exactly how the manual controls worked. More importantly, he confirmed that everything I wanted to do was not only legal, but well within normal dam operation parameters. My team was growing. Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who'd been my only ally on the HOA board, introduced me to Tom Rodriguez, who worked maintenance at the resort. Tom was caught in the middle. He needed his job, but he'd grown up fishing off my great-grandfather's bridge and understood what it meant to the community. "Most of us employees know Linda's bad news," Tom confided. "She treats the staff like servants and the local contractors like dirt. But we can't afford to lose our jobs over principles." Sarah's sister Monica, a paralegal in Dallas, volunteered to help with research. Within 2 days, she'd compiled a comprehensive file on Linda's financial irregularities and HOA violations. The evidence was damning. Linda had essentially been embezzling community funds for months. Here's what I learned about assembling a legal strategy. Water rights attorneys often cost $300 an hour, but historical claims can be worth millions if you have the documentation to back them up. Patricia laid out our negotiation framework during her weekend visit. We'd offer Linda a face-saving compromise. I keep my bridge, she gets architectural approval authority for all new construction, the resort gets guaranteed minimum water levels for their operations, and Linda gets to claim victory for preserving community standards. But we also prepared the nuclear option. If Linda refused to negotiate, I had the legal authority to exercise my water management rights. Patricia explained that this could include routine maintenance of the secondary flow channels, which happened to involve releasing enough water to drop the lake level below the resort's loan trigger. The beauty of it was the timing. Spring runoff season was ending, which meant any water I released wouldn't be naturally replenished for months. By the time the lake refilled, the resort would have missed their entire summer season. Frank walked me through the mechanical process on a quiet Tuesday morning. The bypass valves were hidden under a concrete housing that looked like part of the original dam structure. "Your granddaddy designed this so it could be operated by one man with basic tools," Frank explained. "Turn this wheel clockwise, water flows through the secondary channel. Turn it back, flow stops." I practiced the motions until I could operate the system with my eyes closed. The wheel turned with surprising ease for something that hadn't been used in decades, a testament to Samuel Morrison's engineering. We established our timeline. I'd give Linda one final opportunity to negotiate at the next HOA meeting, a clear, reasonable offer delivered in front of witnesses. If she accepted, everyone wins. If she refused or escalated further, I'd exercise my water rights the following Monday morning. Monica had prepared all the documentation we'd need for media attention. Property records, water rights certificates, evidence of Linda's financial misconduct, and a clear timeline showing her escalating harassment. If this went public, we wanted the narrative to be crystal clear: reasonable homeowner versus corrupt HOA president. Sarah and I spent Sunday evening on our dock, watching the sunset paint the lake gold and red. The sound of water lapping against the pilings was peaceful, but I could hear the undercurrent of change coming. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, her hand finding mine. I squeezed her fingers and tasted the evening air, sweet with the promise of summer. "Linda made this choice when she decided my family's legacy was disposable. I'm just making sure she understands the consequences." Tomorrow, Linda would get her final chance to end this war she'd started. After that, the lake would decide who really had the power here. Linda must have sensed something was coming. 3 days before the scheduled HOA meeting, I got a call from Patricia with news that made my coffee taste like ash. "Jake, they've hired Blackstone and Associates out of Dallas. That's a $2,000 an hour law firm that specializes in crushing property rights claims. Someone's very serious about this fight." Blackstone had immediately filed motions challenging my water rights documentation, claiming the 1923 agreements were archaic and superseded by modern zoning law. They'd also requested an emergency hearing to have my injunction dissolved, arguing that I posed an environmental threat to the lake ecosystem. But Linda's desperation was showing in other ways too. Word around town was that she'd been making calls to resort investors, spinning wild stories about my terrorist threats and plans to sabotage the development. The paranoia was getting to her. Thursday evening, she called her own emergency HOA meeting. The agenda was simple: declare me a clear and present danger to community safety and authorize all necessary measures to protect the resort investment. I walked into that meeting with Patricia, Frank, and a folder full of documents that could end Linda's reign permanently. The community center reeked of nervous sweat and cheap cologne. Linda's supporters had clearly been working overtime to pack the room with their allies. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, standing up during the public comment period, "I'd like to present a final proposal for resolving this dispute." I spread my water rights documentation across the table, followed by the resort's loan agreements and Linda's financial irregularities. I keep my bridge as a historically protected structure. In exchange, I guarantee minimum water levels for resort operations and support architectural review for all new construction. The room went dead silent. You could practically hear Linda's brain processing what she was seeing. "This is extortion," she finally hissed. "You're threatening to destroy a $4 million investment because you can't follow simple community rules." Patricia stood up smoothly. "Mrs. Prescott, my client isn't threatening anything. He's offering to guarantee your water supply in exchange for respecting his grandfathered property rights. That's called negotiation." Linda's face turned the color of boiled lobster. "I don't negotiate with terrorists. This board will not be held hostage by environmental extremism." That's when Frank Wilson cleared his throat. "Ma'am, with respect, Jake's got legal authority over secondary water management that predates your development by 80 years. This isn't extremism, it's property law." The vote was swift and predictable. Linda's board rejected the compromise 6-2, with only Mrs. Chen and old Mr. Patterson supporting negotiation. Linda seemed to think she'd won some kind of victory. "Mr. Morrison," she announced with theatrical smugness, "your threats hold no power here. This community will not bow to your intimidation tactics." Walking out of that meeting, the crunch of gravel under my boots sounded like a countdown timer. Linda had been given every opportunity to end this reasonably. She'd chosen escalation over common sense. The next morning brought news that confirmed Linda's desperation had reached new heights. Tom Rodriguez called me before dawn, his voice tight with worry. "Jake, you need to know Linda offered me $10,000 cash to sabotage the dam controls. Said it would look like equipment failure and you'd get blamed for any damage." $10,000. Linda was so terrified of losing control that she'd moved from harassment to attempted bribery to outright sabotage. "What did you tell her, Tom?" "Told her I'd think about it, then I called the sheriff. They're opening an investigation, but wanted me to let you know she's getting dangerous." That afternoon I got a visit from Deputy Martinez. Linda had filed a new complaint claiming I'd made specific terrorist threats against the dam and resort. The deputy was professional but clearly skeptical. "Mr. Morrison, I've got to ask, have you made any statements about damaging the resort or threatening public safety?" I handed him copies of all my legal documentation and Patricia's contact information. "Deputy, everything I plan to do is completely legal under state water rights law. If Mrs. Prescott considers legal dam operations to be terrorism, that says more about her understanding of the law than my intentions." After he left, I called Patricia with an update. Her response was swift and decisive. "Jake, attempted bribery and false police reports cross a line. We're filing federal charges under water rights interference statutes. But more importantly, you need to move fast. If Linda's this desperate, she might try something that actually is illegal." That evening, I sat on my dock watching the sun set and tasting the metallic edge of adrenaline. Linda had rejected negotiation, attempted bribery, and filed false police reports. She'd made her choice. Monday morning, I'd make mine.